February 8, 1944. New Britain, Cape Gloucester. Private First Class Anthony Demarco crouched at the entrance of a Japanese cave network, his Thompson M1A1 submachine gun held tight against his chest. Intelligence reports indicated that a reinforced Japanese squad, approximately 12 soldiers, had fortified themselves inside the limestone cave system that honeycombed the hillside. The cave entrance was narrow, perhaps 4 feet wide, opening into darkness that standard tactics said would require grenades, flamethrowers, and careful clearing by multiple Marines working in coordination. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Demarco checked his 30-round magazine one final time, the weight of .45 ACP rounds reassuring in his hands. What none of them realized was that this single engagement would reveal the most devastating automatic weapon effect in confined space combat history, a weapon system that could eliminate an entire enemy squad with one continuous burst of fire, creating carnage so complete that surviving Japanese soldiers would refuse to believe the reports from their own men. The Pacific War had evolved into a brutal struggle for cave systems and underground fortifications that Japanese engineers had constructed throughout the island chains. These defensive positions represented the culmination of Japanese tactical thinking about how to neutralize American firepower advantages through prepared positions that limited fields of fire and created close-quarters engagements where Japanese soldiers could utilize their training in night fighting and close combat. Lieutenant Colonel Takeo Ito, commanding Japanese defensive operations on New Britain, had personally supervised the construction of cave networks designed to maximize defensive advantages against American assault tactics. His defensive philosophy emphasized creating killing zones where American numerical and firepower superiority would be negated by terrain and fortifications.
American forces rely on overwhelming firepower delivered at distance, Ito had explained to his company commanders during defensive planning sessions. Our cave systems force them into close-quarters engagements where their artillery and air support cannot assist. In confined spaces, Japanese infantry training and fighting spirit will prevail against American materialism. Ito's tactical assessment was based on combat experience that suggested Japanese forces achieved their best results when forcing American units into close-quarters fighting, where American firepower advantages were minimized. His cave defenses were specifically designed to create conditions where individual Japanese soldiers could engage American infantry at ranges where rifles and grenades were the primary weapons. What Ito's planning had not accounted for was the Thompson submachine gun, a weapon that American forces had been deploying in increasing numbers throughout the Pacific theater. The Thompson M1A1 that Demarco carried was the simplified wartime variant of the famous Tommy gun that had gained notoriety during the Prohibition era. The military version eliminated the Cut's compensator and complex Blish lock mechanism, creating a simpler blowback-operated weapon that maintained the devastating close-range firepower of the original design while being cheaper and faster to manufacture. Technical specifications told only part of the Thompson story. The weapon fired the .45 ACP cartridge, a heavy, slow-moving round designed specifically for stopping power rather than penetration or range. Each .45 caliber bullet weighed 230 grains and traveled at approximately 850 feet per second, delivering kinetic energy that created massive temporary wound cavities in human tissue.
But the true devastation came from the Thompson's cyclic rate. The M1A1 could fire between 600 and 700 rounds per minute in full automatic mode, meaning a sustained burst could deliver 10 to 12 rounds per second. In the confined space of a cave, where Japanese soldiers might be positioned within a 15 to 20-foot area, a single burst could engage multiple targets simultaneously. Sergeant First Class William Stokes, weapons instructor for the 1st Marine Division, had been developing tactical doctrine for Thompson employment in cave warfare. His training manual contained observations about submachine gun effectiveness that would prove prophetic during New Britain operations. The Thompson submachine gun achieves maximum effectiveness in confined spaces where engagement ranges do not exceed 50 feet, Stokes noted in his tactical guide. At these ranges, the .45 ACP round delivers stopping power superior to rifle calibers, while the automatic fire capability enables engaging multiple targets without requiring precise aim. Cave fighting represents ideal employment conditions for Thompson tactics. The ideal employment conditions that Stokes described were about to be demonstrated in the most dramatic fashion possible. Demarco had received 30 minutes of briefing on cave clearing procedures, but his actual combat experience with the Thompson consisted of firing perhaps 200 rounds during training exercises at Camp Pendleton. He was about to discover that theoretical knowledge and actual combat effectiveness were entirely different experiences. The cave assault began with a white phosphorus grenade thrown into the entrance, creating smoke and confusion designed to mask American approach. Standard doctrine called for a two-man entry team, with the first Marine carrying a Thompson while the second provided backup with an M1 Garand rifle. Demarco was designated first man, meaning he would be entering the cave while firing his Thompson on full automatic. Remember, keep your finger on the trigger and sweep from left to right. The Thompson will empty the magazine in about 3 seconds. Make sure you're pointing at the enemy when it happens. 3 seconds, 30 rounds. In the narrow confines of a cave, where Japanese soldiers would be concentrated in defensive positions designed for rifle combat. The mathematics were brutal and inevitable, though no one had yet experienced the actual results of Thompson fire in such conditions.
Demarco entered the cave entrance immediately after the white phosphorus grenade detonated, his Thompson firing before his eyes had adjusted to the darkness. The muzzle flash from his weapon illuminated the cave interior in strobing bursts that revealed Japanese soldiers positioned along both walls of the narrow passage. What happened next would be described in after-action reports as the most one-sided close-quarters engagement of the Pacific War. Demarco's Thompson fired its entire 30-round magazine in 2.7 seconds. The weapon's recoil causing the muzzle to rise and sweep across the cave interior from left to right as he struggled to control the continuous burst. The .45 ACP rounds, traveling at relatively slow velocities but delivering massive kinetic energy, struck Japanese soldiers at ranges varying from 8 to 25 feet. At these distances, the heavy bullets created devastating wound channels that incapacitated targets instantly. Multiple rounds struck individual soldiers as the sweeping burst crossed their positions. The cave interior, approximately 20 feet deep and 12 feet wide, contained 11 Japanese soldiers positioned along improvised sandbag barriers designed to provide cover against grenades and rifle fire. The Thompson burst had engaged all 11 defenders in less than 3 seconds, with most receiving multiple hits as the continuous fire swept across their positions. When Demarco's magazine emptied and the echoing roar of automatic fire faded, the cave was completely silent. His backup, Corporal James Morrison, carrying an M1 Garand, entered behind him expecting to engage surviving Japanese defenders. Instead, he found all 11 enemy soldiers down, killed or incapacitated by wounds so severe that combat capability had been eliminated instantly. Morrison's hands were shaking as he helped Demarco back out of the cave, both Marines struggling to process what they had just experienced. The entire engagement had lasted less than 5 seconds, from grenade detonation to magazine empty. 11 Japanese soldiers, a reinforced squad that should have required sustained combat to neutralize, had been eliminated by a single continuous burst from one Thompson submachine gun.
"I couldn't see anything except muzzle flashes," Demarco told his platoon commander during debriefing. "I just held the trigger down and let the weapon do its work. When the bolt locked back on empty, every Jap in that cave was down. I didn't aim at individual targets. There wasn't time. The Thompson just swept across them all." Demarco's description of the engagement would be replicated in combat reports throughout the Pacific, as American forces began to understand the unique effectiveness of Thompson submachine guns in cave warfare. The weapon's combination of heavy bullet weight, high cyclic rate, and controllability in close quarters was creating combat results that exceeded all previous close-quarters weapons' performance. Captain Robert Cromwell, intelligence officer for the 1st Marine Regiment, had been collecting combat reports on Thompson effectiveness with growing appreciation for the weapon's tactical implications. His assessment documented patterns that were emerging across multiple engagements. Thompson's submachine guns are achieving casualty rates in cave engagements that exceed conventional weapons by factors of 5 to 1, Cromwell noted in his intelligence summary. Multiple reports indicate single Thompson operators eliminating entire Japanese squads through continuous automatic fire in confined spaces. Enemy forces positioned in caves designed to resist rifle and grenade attacks are being overwhelmed by weapons that deliver volumes of fire they cannot survive. The volumes of fire that Cromwell described were being demonstrated repeatedly as Marines armed with Thompson submachine guns cleared cave systems that Japanese defenders had believed were impregnable. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was becoming as significant as the physical casualties. Japanese Sergeant Kenji Watanabe had been positioned in a cave adjacent to the one Demarco cleared. He had heard the brief burst of automatic fire, followed by complete silence, then watched American Marines emerge from the cave entrance without apparent difficulty. His subsequent report to his company commander revealed the psychological shock that Thompson encounters were creating.
The American automatic weapon fired for only seconds, then silence, Watanabe reported. When we investigated, after American forces withdrew, we found our entire squad eliminated. Every soldier had been struck by multiple bullets. The cave interior was covered in blood and spent cartridges. This weapon achieves effects we cannot counter through fortification or tactical positioning. Watanabe's report was being replicated throughout Japanese defensive units as soldiers encountered Thompson fire effects that their training and experience had not prepared them to face. The weapon was creating casualty patterns that seemed impossible based on Japanese understanding of infantry weapons capabilities. The impossibility of surviving Thompson fire in confined spaces was becoming apparent to Japanese commanders who were receiving reports that challenged their fundamental assumptions about cave defense effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel Ito had been forced to revise his tactical assessments as combat reports documented American submachine gun capabilities that his defensive planning had not anticipated. American automatic weapons deliver firepower in cave systems that renders defensive positioning ineffective, Ito noted in his revised tactical assessment. Soldiers positioned to defend against rifle attacks are being eliminated before they can return effective fire. The automatic weapon's sustained fire capability enables engaging all defenders simultaneously rather than sequentially. The simultaneous engagement capability that Ito identified represented a fundamental advantage of automatic weapons in confined spaces. Rifle-armed soldiers had to aim and fire at individual targets sequentially, providing Japanese defenders with opportunities to return fire during engagement pauses. Thompson operators could sweep entire cave interiors with continuous fire that engaged all targets before defensive response was possible. This tactical reality was transforming cave warfare throughout the Pacific as American forces equipped increasing numbers of assault troops with Thompson submachine guns. The weapon that had been considered a specialty item for certain units was becoming standard equipment for Marines assigned to cave clearing operations.
First Sergeant Thomas Bradley, responsible for weapons allocation within his battalion, had been receiving requests for Thompson submachine guns that exceeded available supply by substantial margins. His equipment reports documented the rapid adoption of automatic weapons by units engaged in cave fighting. Current Thompson requisitions exceed available inventory by 400%, Bradley reported to Regimental Supply. Every squad leader involved in cave operations is requesting submachine guns based on combat effectiveness that exceeds conventional weapons. Marines who have witnessed Thompson performance in confined spaces refuse to enter caves with any other weapon. The refusal to enter caves without Thompson submachine guns represented a fundamental shift in Marine tactical thinking based on combat experience that demonstrated overwhelming weapon superiority in specific environments. Japanese cave defenses that should have required prolonged assaults were being cleared in minutes by Thompson-equipped Marines. The speed of cave clearance was enabling American forces to maintain offensive momentum that Japanese defensive planning had assumed would be impossible. Positions that should have delayed American advances for days were being overrun in hours as Thompson-equipped assault teams systematically eliminated cave defenders who had believed their positions were invulnerable to American firepower.
March 3, 1944. The word had spread throughout Japanese defensive positions across New Britain with the speed that only genuine terror can achieve. American Marines were employing continuous fire weapons that could eliminate entire squads before defenders could return effective fire. Japanese soldiers who had volunteered enthusiastically for cave defense assignments were now refusing orders to occupy positions they knew would become death traps. Lieutenant Yoshiro Tanaka, commanding a platoon assigned to cave defense on New Britain's northern coast, had been forced to deal with unprecedented disciplinary problems as his soldiers expressed open reluctance to enter defensive positions they had constructed weeks earlier. "The men say that cave defense is suicide against American automatic weapons," Tanaka reported to his company commander in a confidential assessment. "They have heard reports from survivors that American submachine guns fire so rapidly that entire squads are killed before anyone can aim a rifle. Morale is collapsing among soldiers who previously demonstrated excellent fighting spirit." The morale collapse that Tanaka documented was spreading throughout Japanese defensive forces as combat reports confirmed that Thompson submachine guns were achieving effects that seemed impossible based on conventional weapons understanding. The psychological impact was proving as devastating as the physical casualties. But the psychological effects were supported by statistical evidence that Japanese commanders could not dismiss as exaggeration or panic. Intelligence analysts studying American tactics were forced to acknowledge that Thompson submachine guns represented capabilities their defensive planning had not anticipated. Major Hiroshi Nakamura, Japanese intelligence officer analyzing American weapons employment, had been compiling reports on Thompson effectiveness with growing recognition that Japanese tactics required fundamental revision. His assessment documented the scope of American automatic weapons advantages. American Thompson submachine guns achieve fire rates exceeding 600 rounds per minute, delivering multiple .45 caliber projectiles per second, Nakamura noted in his weapons analysis. In cave environments where our soldiers are positioned within confined areas, single American operators can engage entire squads simultaneously. Our defensive tactics based on rifle combat are obsolete against these weapons.
The obsolescence of Japanese defensive tactics was becoming apparent across every Pacific island where American forces were deploying Thompson-equipped assault teams. Cave systems that should have required prolonged siege operations were being cleared in hours as Marines discovered that automatic weapons provided decisive advantages in environments where Japanese training and fortifications should have been most effective. The decisive advantages were being demonstrated during the Admiralty Islands campaign, where American forces encountered extensive Japanese cave networks that had been fortified over months of preparation. Japanese commanders had believed these positions would inflict severe casualties on American assault forces, but Thompson-equipped Marines were achieving breakthrough rates that exceeded all operational planning assumptions.
Corporal Michael Sullivan, commanding a fire team during the Los Negros assault, had been equipped with a Thompson M1A1, the earlier variant featuring a 50-round drum magazine that provided sustained fire capability exceeding the standard 30-round stick magazines. His combat experience would demonstrate the devastating effects of extended Thompson bursts in cave fighting. The 50-round drum lets you keep firing long enough to sweep an entire cave interior without reloading, Sullivan explained to his platoon during tactical briefings. You enter firing and don't stop until the drum empties. Everything in front of the muzzle goes down. There's no aiming, just continuous fire that fills the space with lead. Sullivan's tactical approach was being adopted by Thompson operators throughout the Pacific as Marines discovered that sustained automatic fire achieved better results than aimed shooting in cave environments where visibility was limited and targets were often obscured. The Thompson's controllability, even during extended bursts, made it possible to maintain fire on target areas without the weapon climbing uncontrollably. The controllability factor was critical to Thompson effectiveness in ways that Japanese defenders could not counter through improved tactics or fortifications. American Marines with minimal training could enter caves firing on full automatic and achieve casualty rates that exceeded what experienced riflemen could accomplish with aimed fire. Staff Sergeant Raymond Collins, conducting Thompson training for replacement Marines arriving in the Pacific, had developed instructional methods that emphasized instinctive shooting over precision marksmanship. His training reflected combat realities that contradicted peacetime weapons doctrine.
Don't try to aim the Thompson like a rifle, Collins instructed trainee classes. Point it like you're pointing your finger, squeeze the trigger, and let the weapon do its work. In a cave, you're not shooting at individual targets, you're filling the space with bullets. The Thompson fires fast enough that you'll hit everything in front of you. Collins' point-shooting methodology was producing Marines who could operate Thompson submachine guns with effectiveness that maximized the weapon's advantages while minimizing the training time required to achieve combat proficiency. Japanese defenders who had trained for years in rifle marksmanship were being overwhelmed by American Marines with weeks of Thompson familiarization. The minimal training requirements were enabling rapid expansion of Thompson-equipped units throughout American forces engaged in Pacific operations. Weapons that had initially been issued to specialized assault teams were becoming standard equipment for forward infantry units that expected to encounter cave defenses. Major General Roy Geiger, commanding the 3rd Amphibious Corps, had been monitoring Thompson employment patterns with growing appreciation for the weapon's tactical impact. His assessment to Marine Corps headquarters documented the transformation of cave warfare tactics. Thompson submachine guns have revolutionized cave assault operations, Geiger noted in his tactical evaluation. Positions that previously required coordinated attacks with multiple support elements can now be neutralized by individual fire teams equipped with automatic weapons. Japanese cave defenses that should delay our advances for days are being cleared in hours due to Thompson effectiveness in confined spaces. The hours, rather than days timeline that Geiger documented, was enabling American forces to maintain offensive momentum that Japanese defensive planning had assumed would be impossible. Thompson-equipped Marines were achieving breakthrough rates that exceeded the capacity of Japanese reinforcement and resupply to maintain defensive coherence.
But perhaps the most significant factor was the cumulative psychological effect on Japanese forces, who were witnessing the systematic destruction of defensive positions they had believed were impregnable. The combination of physical casualties and psychological trauma was creating defensive collapse that exceeded what combat casualties alone could achieve. Japanese Captain Masao Ishikawa, commanding a company tasked with cave defense on Biak Island, had been forced to develop new tactical approaches after witnessing traditional cave defense tactics failing against American Thompson tactics. His revised doctrine acknowledged the fundamental advantages that American automatic weapons provided. American automatic weapons achieve fire superiority in caves that our rifle-equipped soldiers cannot match, Ishikawa noted in his tactical directive. Traditional defensive tactics that position soldiers along cave walls create concentrated targets for American sweeping fire. New directive: disperse defenders throughout cave depth and initiate immediate counterattack when Americans enter, rather than attempting to defend from static positions. Ishikawa's tactical revision represented Japanese recognition that traditional cave defense doctrine was failing against Thompson-equipped American forces. His emphasis on immediate counterattack, rather than prepared defensive positions, acknowledged that static defense was suicidal against weapons that could eliminate defenders before they could return effective fire. But even revised Japanese tactics were proving inadequate against Thompson capabilities that exceeded Japanese weapons' performance by margins that tactics could not overcome. American automatic fire rates and .45 ACP stopping power were creating advantages that Japanese training and tactical innovation could not counter effectively. The inadequacy of Japanese countermeasures was demonstrated during the Battle of Peleliu, where Japanese forces had constructed the most elaborate cave defense system in the Pacific. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had incorporated lessons from previous campaigns, creating defensive positions designed specifically to counter American tactics that had proven effective on other islands. Our cave systems include multiple firing positions that enable defenders to engage American forces from multiple angles simultaneously, Nakagawa explained in his defensive planning documents. Interconnected tunnels allow rapid repositioning to avoid American flamethrowers and demolitions. We will force Americans into prolonged cave fighting where their firepower advantages are minimized.
Nakagawa's defensive preparations were the most sophisticated Japanese cave defenses of the Pacific War, but they had been designed primarily to counter conventional American tactics rather than the Thompson-equipped assault teams that were becoming standard throughout Marine infantry units. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, serving with K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines during the Peleliu Assault, witnessed Thompson effectiveness in cave fighting that exceeded anything he had experienced in previous operations. His observations captured the reality of automatic weapons dominance in the brutal cave warfare. The Marines with Thompson submachine guns went into caves that should have required entire platoons to clear, Sledge would later write. They'd disappear into the darkness, firing on full automatic, and emerge minutes later with empty magazines and caves full of dead Japanese. The Thompson made cave clearing almost routine rather than the desperate fighting we expected. The routine nature of cave clearing that Sledge described represented a fundamental transformation in Pacific warfare tactics. Operations that should have required complex coordination and significant casualties were being accomplished by small teams equipped with weapons optimized for the specific combat environment. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller, commanding the 1st Marine Regiment on Peleliu, had been monitoring Thompson employment with growing recognition that the weapon represented a decisive tactical advantage in the cave fighting that characterized the battle. His operational assessment documented the weapon's impact on combat effectiveness. Thompson-equipped Marines are clearing cave systems at rates that exceed our most optimistic planning assumptions, Puller reported to Division Headquarters. Positions that intelligence estimated would require battalion-level assault are being neutralized by reinforced squads. Japanese cave defenses, regardless of sophistication, cannot withstand Thompson fire delivered in confined spaces. The inability of Japanese defenses to withstand Thompson fire was forcing Japanese commanders to acknowledge that cave warfare tactics that had achieved success earlier in the Pacific Campaign were no longer viable against American forces equipped with overwhelming automatic weapons advantages.
General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, planning defensive operations for Iwo Jima, had studied American tactics on Peleliu and other islands with growing understanding that Japanese cave defenses required fundamental revision. His assessment to Japanese high command acknowledged the scope of American automatic weapon superiority. American Thompson submachine guns have invalidated traditional cave defense tactics, Kuribayashi noted in his defensive planning assessment. These weapons deliver fire rates that enable engaging multiple defenders simultaneously before effective return fire is possible. Recommend future defensive planning emphasize dispersed positions and immediate counterattack rather than static cave defense. Kuribayashi's recommendation represented the highest-level Japanese acknowledgement that American automatic weapons had created tactical advantages that Japanese forces could not counter through improved fortifications or revised tactics. The Thompson submachine gun had proven decisive in the close-quarters combat that should have favored Japanese defensive preparations. But Kuribayashi's recognition came too late to affect Japanese defensive preparations across most of the Pacific. American Marines armed with Thompson submachine guns were systematically clearing cave systems throughout the island chains, achieving results that were forcing Japanese soldiers to acknowledge the futility of cave defense against American automatic weapons. By mid-1945, captured Japanese documents revealed the psychological impact that Thompson encounters had created throughout Japanese defensive forces. Soldiers who survived initial engagements with American submachine guns demonstrated extreme reluctance to occupy cave positions they knew would become death traps. The death trap recognition was validated by casualty statistics that showed cave defenders facing Thompson-equipped American forces suffered mortality rates exceeding 95% in direct engagements. Japanese soldiers positioned in caves that should have provided maximum defensive advantage were being eliminated with efficiency that approached total annihilation. Master Sergeant Thomas Bradley, analyzing combat effectiveness data for Marine Corps weapons assessment, had compiled statistics that documented Thompson's superiority in cave warfare with mathematical precision. Thompson submachine guns achieved casualty ratios in cave combat averaging 15-1 in favor of American forces, Bradley noted in his weapons effectiveness study. Comparable engagements using rifle-equipped assault teams achieve ratios of approximately 3-1. Thompson employment reduces American casualties by factors of 5, while increasing enemy casualties by similar margins.
The statistical evidence that Bradley compiled confirmed what combat Marines had experienced firsthand. Thompson submachine guns provided overwhelming advantages in cave warfare that exceeded any other infantry weapon's performance in comparable environments. The weapon had proven decisive in combat conditions that characterized Pacific Island fighting. The decisiveness extended beyond pure combat effectiveness to psychological impact that was undermining Japanese defensive morale across the theater. Soldiers who had volunteered enthusiastically for cave defense duty were refusing assignments they knew would result in near-certain death against American automatic weapons they could not survive. Japanese Lieutenant Saburo Nakamura, captured after his position was overrun by Thompson-equipped Marines, provided American intelligence with insights into the psychological effects that submachine gun encounters created among Japanese forces. "We were told that cave positions would protect us from American firepower," Nakamura explained during interrogation. "When we encountered the American automatic weapons, we discovered that caves became traps rather than protection. The continuous fire fills the entire space with bullets. There is no defense against this weapon in confined areas. Surrender becomes preferable to certain death." Nakamura's admission that surrender became preferable to cave defense represented a revolutionary shift in Japanese military psychology. Soldiers indoctrinated to fight to the death were acknowledging that Thompson-equipped American forces created combat conditions where resistance was futile and survival through surrender was the rational choice. The rational choice calculus was appearing in captured documents and prisoner interrogations throughout the final months of the Pacific War, as Japanese soldiers recognized that American automatic weapons superiority had made traditional defensive tactics suicidal rather than heroic. The Thompson submachine gun had achieved what American firepower superiority, tactical innovation, and material advantages had struggled to accomplish throughout the Pacific Campaign. It had broken Japanese willingness to defend cave positions that should have required prolonged siege operations to reduce. In the final analysis, the weapon that Japanese soldiers couldn't believe could eliminate entire squads with single bursts had proven decisive in the brutal, close-quarters combat that characterized Pacific Island warfare. American industrial capacity had created a weapon optimized for specific combat conditions, and that weapon had achieved results that exceeded all tactical predictions and enemy defensive preparations.